Russia's drones fly far and slow. They're dangerous and extremely difficult for Ukraine to take down with the same sort of air power that it would use to destroy missiles such as the F-16. That's why what one Ukrainian F-16 pilot just did is so unbelievable. This pilot just destroyed a drone instantly using a weapon that resulted in them taking a huge risk, and here's the best part, it was all caught on camera. Watch as Ukraine's pilot does the unbelievable, and we'll explain why this shot was a lot harder than it looked. Let's start with a takedown. On February 8th, the video started doing the rounds on the internet. Lasting for just a few seconds, it shows us everything we need to see to prove that Ukraine's F-16 pilot just pulled off the incredible. A Russian Geran-2 drone is seen flying overhead as it's filmed by people on the ground. The telltale buzz fills the air. The drone is making its way to a target, and it seems like nothing is around to stop it. Then, boom, the drone explodes into flames. The person filming the video recoils for a moment, shocked by the scale of the explosion, but they are able to point their camera back toward the sky long enough to catch what did the damage. The Ukrainian F-16 flies by as the shattered, tiny pieces of the drone fall to the ground. More details about the strike started emerging soon after the video went public. The aviationist was among several outlets that identified the drone as a Russian Geran-2, which is based on the Iranian Shahed-136. That means it's precisely the type of drone that Russia has been using in the intense long-range strategy that saw it launch over 6,000 attack drones at Ukraine in January alone. As for the F-16, it's believed to have been operated by a member of Ukraine's 107th Separate Aviation Wing. It all looks so simple in the footage, but the reality is that this takedown of a Russian Geran-2 was incredibly difficult, and we're going to explain the reasons why. First, you have to account for the speed factor. F-16s travel at immense speeds that are far greater than anything that Russia's long-range drones can pull off. That creates immediate risk right off the bat. As the Kyiv Post points out, experts state that engagements like the one that has just been caught on camera are incredibly dangerous because even the smallest of mistakes can lead to catastrophe. That's even the case when it's one F-16 versus one Geran-2. The F-16 is able to hit a maximum speed of Mach 2 at altitude, which amounts to about 1,500 miles per hour. The one seen in the footage was flying relatively low to counter Russia's drone, which is risky in its own right, so it was likely flying slower than its top speed. Still, we can safely assume that Ukraine's F-16 was moving at several hundred miles per hour, perhaps even breaking the sound barrier to get to Russia's drone. Conversely, the Geran-2 has a cruising speed of about 180 kilometers or about 101 miles per hour. However, there are also jet-powered variants of the drone that Russia claims can reach speeds of 800 kilometers or a little under 500 miles per hour. If the filmed drone was one of these variants, it almost certainly wasn't traveling anywhere near this speed. At this low altitude, it would have quickly passed over the observers' heads. So let's assume the Geran-2 in the footage was one of the slower versions. What this means is that Ukraine used an airframe that is capable of flying at almost 20 times the speed of the Geran-2 to destroy the drone. That's like pitting an Olympic-caliber sprinter against somebody who's running backward while blindfolded. And while that seems like an advantage, it really isn't. Sure, Ukraine's F-16 pilot could have launched an expensive missile such as the AIM-9 Sidewinder, but that's a missile that costs almost $400,000 depending on the variant. So it's not an ideal choice for taking out a drone that costs Russia somewhere in the region of $20,000 to $50,000. So there was no fire and forget at play here. Ukraine's F-16 pilot used a different weapon, and we're going to dig into why that weapon added risk in just a moment. However, the use of this weapon means that our Olympian versus blindfolded backward runner analogy has a new twist. Now the Olympian has the runner right in front of them. Their job is to somehow take the runner out without colliding with them, and all they have is a gun while they're running at an incredible pace. That's similar to what we saw in the footage. Ukraine's pilot would be moving at such speed compared to the drone, or while lining up a shot, that one misfire or one miscalculation could have led to a disaster. A collision could have happened. And if it did, the explosion caused by the Geran-2, which was at least double the size of the drone itself, would have engulfed the F-16 pilot. That pilot had to get it right the first time of asking. And believe us when we say that the weapon of choice didn't make the task any easier. That weapon wasn't a missile, as we mentioned earlier. According to the aviationist, Ukraine's pilot used their F-16's M61 Vulcan cannon to destroy the Russian drone. This is far from a bad weapon. It's able to rattle off 20mm rounds at a rate of 6,000 per minute, which is more than enough to shred through a Shahed-type drone as long as the rounds hit their mark. But hitting the mark is the big challenge. Using a gun is more cost-effective than using a missile, but it comes with the added risk of forcing the pilot to fly low and engage a slow-moving target as quickly as possible. The cannon has an effective firing range of as little as 600 meters or a touch under 2,000 feet, per War History Online. What this means is that an F-16 traveling at Mach 2 would need to close in on Russia's drone to make the use of a cannon viable. Once at the maximum effective range, the F-16 would be traveling at 2,200 feet per second, which means it would eat up that range in less than a second. That's how long Ukraine's pilot had to A, pull the trigger and get out of the way of the Russian drone, assuming they were flying at top speed. And even if we halve the speed to Mach 1, that still amounts to less than 2 seconds to pull off a perfectly accurate kill shot before there's a chance that the F-16 could collide with the drone. It doesn't matter if your cannon can rattle off 100 rounds per second. Those rounds aren't on target in time, disaster awaits. Or as the aviationist puts it, this does present a much higher level of risk than the standoff launching of an air-to-air missile. If successful, it's highly effective. But if mistakes are made, this could quickly cause the loss of both the aircraft and, more importantly, its highly trained pilot. By now you're likely getting a picture in your mind of how talented Ukraine's F-16 pilots must be to pull off a kill like the one we just saw. And we'll be getting to that right after we cover the strange type of irony in all of this, as well as another risk that Ukraine's F-16 pilot took on. On the irony front, the very thing that makes the F-16 so effective as a fighter jet when dealing with the traditional threats it's supposed to handle, such as missiles and other airframes, is what makes it so risky for the jet to be used against a drone. As the National Interest notes, supersonic speed improves the F-16's intercept capability. However, that capability was designed for catching up to fast-moving aircraft and missiles, not for dealing with drones. Speed that allows the F-16 to keep pace with one type of weapon can lead to the kind of mid-air collisions we touched on before, and it likely has. Ukraine has lost F-16s in its drone attacks before. By May of 2025, 3 of Ukraine's F-16s had crashed, with the most recent one doing so while actively engaging aerial targets using its M61 cannon. In an article in which he discussed the incident, military expert Wes O'Donnell says that it's likely that the F-16 was trying to take out either cruise missiles or incoming drones. It managed to shoot down 3 of its 4 targets before an emergency developed on board. The F-16 crashed. Thankfully, the pilot managed to eject in time, after steering their jet away from populated areas and was in a satisfactory condition. Now, we don't know if one of the targets the pilot was trying to destroy with their M61 ended up hitting the F-16. A mechanical fault could also have occurred, perhaps even one prompted by the pilot having to twist and turn so much to deal with the slow-moving targets. But the point we're making here is that the F-16 pilot who just pulled off the spectacular in February would have known how dangerous their move was. They would have seen it lead to disaster before. But they took the risk anyway, and that risk paid off. To add a brutal cherry on the top of this risk Sunday, Ukraine's F-16 pilot may have had one more thing to worry about as they bore down on Russia's drone. According to the aviationist, Russia has started adding 9K333 Verba man pads to its Geran drones. This was discovered when an intact drone landed on the ground in Ukraine, which showed that the man pads were being mounted on top of the Geran-2. Why does this matter? This man pad was loaded with a Soviet-era R-60 infrared-guided short-range air-to-air missile that presumably can be launched at missiles or aircraft that come to engage it. We don't know how many Geran-2s have these man pads. We also don't know if the one that Ukraine's pilot just took out had one, so we only see the underside of the drone in the footage. What we do know is that Russia is using this tweaked version of its long-range drone, meaning at least some of its Geran-2s now have the ability to fire back at incoming F-16s. Risk upon risk upon risk. To overcome all of that, Ukraine needs to have some pretty special pilots. The good news, as we saw in the footage, is that special pilots are precisely what Ukraine has. Ukraine started sending its pilots to train on how to use the F-16 quite a while before the first of the fighter jets arrived in the country. Back in December 2023, Forces News reported that Ukrainian combat pilots had been training with the UK's Royal Air Force, or RAF, and had moved on to more training following their completion of the RAF program. The first cohort included 6 pilots, with many more coming later, and they faced the dual risks of learning how to fly the F-16 after careers spent flying Soviet-era Russian airframes and learning how to deal with the aviation-specific English that they needed to learn to use their F-16s effectively. Another 10 pilots had completed the language course but stayed behind in the UK to continue the fight training and learn a host of other skills, including centrifuge training and aviation medicine. Even back then, Ukraine's pilots were showcasing hints of their amazing skills. Speaking about these first trainees, Air Chief Marshal Sir Richard Knighton, who is now the Chief of Defence Staff in the UK, but was the Chief of the Air Staff when Ukraine's pilots started receiving their training, delivered glowing praise. Making reference to the few, which is a term used in the UK to describe the talented pilots of a past generation who fought off the Luftwaffe during World War II, Knighton said, It's been an honor for us to host you and train you here in the UK. You have impressed us immensely with your enthusiasm to learn, your motivation, your professional skill, your courage, and your complete focus on your cause. It's clear that Ukraine's pilots had the right stuff for the F-16 from the outset. However, what we've seen from Ukraine since the first F-16s arrived in the country in August 2024 has shown that its pilots do far more than apply what they've learned. They build on it, they innovate, and they have shown many times over that they're able to use the F-16 in ways that nobody ever saw them managing to do. By January 2025, Ukraine's F-16 pilots had gotten notably better in almost no time at all. In that month, one of the country's pilots managed to pull off a world first by destroying 6 of Russia's cruise missiles in a single mission. Give that feat some context, the F-16 turned 50 years old in 2024. It's far from a new airframe. That age also means that there has been half a century in which a pilot could have pulled off something like what Ukraine's pilot did in January 2025, but nobody had. Not until Ukraine's aviators got their hands on the Western fighter jet. US Air Force veteran John Venable was quick to highlight how impressive this was, noting that Ukraine's pilots had already started blending their Western training with Cold War skills to create a new style of flying from which the West had to learn. Your ability to actually fly really low until you actually need to expose yourself in order to deliver ordnance or shoot another aircraft down, that skill set is no small thing to grab a hold of. Venable said of the techniques Ukraine's pilots were using, adding, "It takes a while to do that, and in the process, you lose a lot of aircraft. You lose a lot of pilots because of collision with the ground. These are Cold War era tactics." And as Venable notes, Ukraine has already mastered them, and the US would do well to start leaning into the sorts of strategies that it abandoned in the 1990s to do the same. In just over a year, the students had become the teachers when it came to utilizing the F-16. More was to come. A year after Venable's comments, Ukraine was showing that it could innovate even further with the F-16. By the beginning of this year, Ukraine's pilots had scrapped much of the NATO playbook in their frontline engagements. One of those pilots explained why, stating, "When we came back home from training, we faced reality. The tactics we were taught abroad were not entirely suitable for the war we're fighting, because those tactics are based on wars our partners fought in the past, and this war is fundamentally different." The challenge that Ukraine faced was the NATO playbook is all about creating air superiority through a combination of numbers and skill. Ukraine has plenty of the latter, but not enough of the former to do that in Russia. So its pilots adapted again. They rethought everything about what they'd initially learned about the US air platform: how to destroy cruise missiles, how to take out drones, how to fight Russia near the lines of contact without placing themselves at risk of being shot down by the air defenses. These are all things that Ukraine's pilots have needed to teach themselves, with their Western training being the foundation rather than the be-all and end-all of their knowledge. And that brings us back to the footage. To the casual observer, the video that started being shared around the net in February doesn't seem remarkable. A Russian drone gets shot out of the sky by an F-16. That makes sense. F-16s are far more powerful than drones. But to those in the know, the video showcases plenty about what makes Ukraine's pilots so special. The ability to pull off such a shot at speed while dealing with a threat that could potentially fire back is extremely impressive. So is the Ukrainian pilot having to fly low to make the shot in the first place. There are so many things that the pilot needed to juggle to come through that incident unscathed, and with another Russian drone notched on their record, that it's clear that what we see in the footage is no ordinary shot. It's extraordinary. Most shockingly of all, Ukraine has been doing this sort of thing almost since it received F-16s. Back in September 2025, footage emerged of a Ukrainian F-16 taking out a Shahid-type drone. It wasn't as widely shared as the most recent clip because frankly it's difficult to see what happened. The camera is shaky, and the person filming the incident only just managed to catch what happened. Plus, the F-16 appears to have been operating at a much higher altitude. But it's all there in the footage if you look close enough. Another F-16 flies by, and a Russian drone gets turned into dust. According to Ukraine's Air Force, the use of the F-16 in this manner has just turned into a bone in the enemy's throat. By the beginning of this year, Ukraine was claiming to have pulled off 1,000 kills against Russian cruise missiles and attack drones. It's unlikely that air-to-air missiles were used for most of these kills. Ukraine would have burned through millions of dollars of munitions that way. The M61 must be the weapon of choice, not just in February, but in almost every engagement. Ukraine has turned taking out Russia's aerial assets into a fine art. Its pilots know the risks, they have the skills, and in February just one of those pilots showcased those skills in action in a rare instance where they were filmed doing what they've been doing for well over a year. There'll be a lot more where that comes from too. It took Ukraine a little over a year to get to 1,000 aerial kills, maybe it'll manage 2,000 by the end of 2026, proving just how vital this airframe and those flying it have become to Ukraine's defense against Russia. And if Putin thought that Ukraine was limiting its F-16s to defensive actions, he needs to think again. Ukraine knows exactly how to use its US-made fighter jets to do damage on the ground. We saw that toward the end of November 2025, when Ukraine lured Russian forces assaulting Myrnarad into a trap, only to spring F-16s on them as part of a coordinated counterattack that left Russia devastated. Find out more about how Ukraine unleashed hell in Myrnarad in our video. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe to The Military Show for more in-depth examinations into how Ukraine uses its Western weapons in unbelievable ways. And thank you for watching.